Hi, welcome to AMI Day 16, the Legacies of Segregation. Today we're going to start with the idea that there are consequences of dividing people by race, and those are things we can still see today. So again, as ever, be open-minded, be introspective, and really put some thought into the work you're doing today. As we've mentioned before in class, until the 1960s and 70s, a lot of states had laws that required segregation. They required separation of people by race. So you might remember we called those Jim Crow laws. Although those laws no longer exist, their legacy still shapes the way many people view themselves and others. So today I want you to ask yourself what you know about segregation and how segregation is related to the ideas of race and racism that we've been thinking about for the past few days. In the 19th century, many Americans came to believe that some races are superior to others. Few questioned that idea. After all, racist ideas were taught in schools and even universities, preached from pulpits, reinforced in books, magazines, and newspapers. After surveying the leading publications in the middle of the 19th century, historian Reginald Horseman notes one did not have to read obscure books to know that the Caucasians were innately superior, and that they were responsible for civilization in the world, or to know that inferior races were destined to be overwhelmed or even to disappear. These ideas permeated the main American periodicals, and in the second half of the 19th century formed part of the accepted truth of America's school books. They also shaped the way Americans defined citizenship. Immediately after the American Revolution, only 3 states, Virginia, South Carolina, and Georgia, allowed only white men to vote. Until 1800, no northern state limited suffrage on the basis of race. After 1800, however, every state that entered the Union, with the exception of Maine, placed restrictions on the right of African Americans to vote. States that had long permitted blacks to vote now narrowed or removed that right entirely. In 1821, for example, New Yorkers wrote a new constitution. It no longer required that white male citizens own property in order to vote. At the same time, it raised the property requirements for black citizens to $250, a sum beyond the reach of almost all the state's black voters at that time. By the late 1850s, blacks could vote on the same basis as whites in only 5 states, all of them in New England. In 1857, the language of exclusion reached the U.S. Supreme Court. In the Dred Scott decision, Chief Justice Roger B. Taney ruled that blacks had no rights which the white man was bound to respect. The American people, Taney argued, constituted a political family, restricted to whites. Although slavery was abolished in 1865, the amendment to the Constitution did not end racism. In fact, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the number of state and federal laws that kept the races apart increased sharply. Historian Lerone Bennett Jr. likens the system of segregation that divided black and white Americans during those years to a wall. That wall did not go up in a single day. It was built, he writes, brick by brick, bill by bill, fear by fear. Long after that wall came down in the 1970s, the legacies of decades of separation remained. So for today, we're going to start with reading 2 accounts of people who experienced segregation firsthand. One, an African American school teacher from Louisiana, and one, a white educator from Oklahoma. So it's kind of interesting how both of their experiences of school and their early lives were really shaped by their communities and the people they were exposed to. Okay, so that will be pretty much the focus, and I do really want you to think carefully about each of the questions that you're given, because some of them have multiple parts, and you want to make sure you're answering all of it thoroughly and not just parts of questions. Okay, let me know if you need anything. See you tomorrow.